The First Order. C1, A Sickness in the Head. Chapter 1, A Sickness in the Head. Translator, Leg Editor, Leg. In the chaotic darkness, the young Aranziasu awoke and started wiping off the sweat on his forehead. Then he looked towards the boy of around 14 who was standing at the door. Liu Yuan, did anything happen? Ranziasu asked. Addressed as Liu Yuan, the boy's full name was Yan Liu Yuan. From his appearance, Yan Liu Yuan looked like a very harmless and innocent person. However, he was holding a bone knife in his hands and standing guard at the door. It was deep into the night at the moment, but he did not close his eyes even though he looked very sleepy, as he had to keep watch through the night. Yan Liu Yuan shook his head and said, "No, everything is fine." What exactly is this sickness you're experiencing in your head? Even the town's doctor can't diagnose what's wrong with you? You don't have to worry about such things. What I'm experiencing is not a sickness. Ranziasu said firmly, "It'll be dawn soon, and I'll be going out to hunt. You should sleep for a while so that you can get up in time for school." Okay. Yan Liu Yuan nodded, glum. But what's the point of studying in a wasteland like this? It will be useful for you in the future, Ranziasu said in an irrefutable tone. I want to go out to hunt too. Yan Liu Yuan pouted. Who's going to keep watch at night if something happens to you? Me, who's unconscious. Ranziasu stood up and prepared to go fetch water from the town center as it was less dangerous to do so after dawn broke. During the night, it was a lawless land out there. Dark clouds were building up without rest in the cloudy sky. A drop of acid rain eventually fell from above. It got blown about by the strong winds and finally landed in front of Ranziasu. Ranziasu was lying on the ground in the wilderness. He frowned and felt that he was a little unlucky today as the acid rain arrived before his prey appeared. Someone mentioned that he must be careful of the beasts while moving around in this wasteland. But Ranziasu felt that the person left everything else unspoken, because many things could still kill a person out in this wasteland. One of them was the acid rain. However, Ranziasu still did not make a move. If he couldn't catch some game today, he and Yan Liu Yuan would starve to death before they could die from the disease caused by the acid rain. Ranziasu's eyes popped when he heard a bird's wings flapping. However, the rhythm of his breathing did not change. Ranziasu had used a tree branch to prop up a black cauldron and scattered some black bread crumbs underneath it a short distance ahead of himself. That large bird landed beside the cauldron and looked around sharply with an alert gaze. The size of the bird was not that much smaller than the cauldron, in fact. As it stood in the same spot preening its feathers, Ranziasu did not make a move and continued waiting. The bird finally seemed to let its guard down as it started sneaking towards the cauldron as a thief would. However, when it entered into the boundary under the cauldron and was about to lower its head to peck on the breadcrumbs, Ranziasu pulled hard on the rope in his hand. Right after, the young man jumped up and rushed towards the cauldron like an unbridled wild donkey. Before the large bird could flip the cauldron over, he mustered all of his strength and used his body to pin down the cauldron. Phew! Ranziasu heaved a sigh of relief as he had waited an entire night just to catch this sparrow. Fortunately, his efforts had not gone to waste today, especially since such good opportunities were hard to come by. Clattering came from inside the cauldron as the struggling sparrow battered its tough wings against it. At this moment, the short melody of the clock striking the hour rang from the refugee stronghold. Ranziasu turned around and looked at the town. He wondered when he could finally bring Yan Liu Yuan to live inside the stronghold. To Ranziasu, the people living in the stronghold were fortunate because they did not have to face the dangers of the wastelands. However, not just anyone could enter that place as they wished. Right at this moment, the activity in the cauldron quieted by a lot. He let out a sigh and checked if the ragged cloth was wrapped firmly around his hand. Then Ranziasu slowly lifted the cauldron up to create a tiny opening and put his hand in. He attempted to grab hold of the large sparrow by its legs. However, life was not always that smooth sailing. Ranziasu yelped right after putting his hand under the cauldron. Ranziasu pulled out his hand and had a look at his palm. The web between his thumb and forefinger was bleeding, as not even the ragged cloth could protect it against the sparrow's sharp beak. Ranziasu got angry. He removed his ragged jacket and wrapped it around his hand. Then he thrust his hand under the cauldron again and grabbed the sparrow by its neck this time. He took the sparrow out from under the cauldron and tucked it in his arm. With a strong twist of his hand, the sparrow's neck broke and it went limp. At this moment, Ranziasu felt a pinch in his heart because the large sparrow's claws had punched several holes into his jacket. Suddenly, his mind went blank, and Ranziasu fell to his knees. It was as if a massive copper bell had been struck inside his head. Then he descended into a chaotic darkness. Oh no! In the past, this sickness only occurred at midnight, but now it came earlier? This was not the first time his sickness had acted up. Almost all the people in town knew there was something wrong with his head, and his pain would flare up at random times. Only Ranziasu knew that it was not pain but a state of confusion that he was experiencing. Wait a minute. This time, it was different from the past. The black mist in his mind had dispersed and revealed a palace beyond it. Ranziasu's eyes flew open, and he stood up. He looked at himself in disbelief. I came to this quickly. He originally had a chance to get a closer look at the palace's appearance, but he knew better. There was no difference between remaining unconscious and dying out here in the wilderness. Right now, he had to rush back to the town that was situated outside of Stronghold 113 before the heavens opened up with the acid rain. Ranziasu tied the sparrow's legs together and slung it over his shoulder. Then he lifted the big cauldron and inverted it onto his head before running away. Pitter-patter. Raindrops started falling on the cauldron. The cauldron had turned into his umbrella. Before he could run far, however, the silhouette of a person holding a bone knife stood in his way. Give your catch to me. But before the person could finish his sentence, he saw a big cauldron swinging in closer and closer, until it smacked into his face. Damn! The robber fell backwards. He had not expected Ranziasu's attack to be that swift. And it was so forceful too. Then he saw Ranziasu lower the pot before swinging it back up and placing it over his head to use as an umbrella, all in a single, continuous motion. The robber had not even fallen to the ground, yet Ranziasu was already running off into the distance. The robber laid on the ground facing the sky as the acid rain came down. It was a little painful and stung his face. There was something about this that he could not understand. In most situations, shouldn't there be some interaction between them? Just how many times had this young man encountered a similar situation to react so instinctively? Something was not right. He could hear that young man's footsteps approaching again. The robber hurriedly sat up and turned around to look. He discovered that the young man was coming back to him. Ranziasu had not planned to return, but he distinctly heard a voice reverberate from the palace in his mind. Quest, gift your catch to someone else. Who said that? Ranziasu turned around and walked back to the robber with some uncertainty. The robber said in panic, let's talk this over. Hey, that's not right, I'm the victim here. Ranziasu sized up the robber. He noticed that there were no others nearby. You want this sparrow? Ranziasu asked. The robber's eyes lit up. I do. Here, take it. Ranziasu stuffed the sparrow into the man's arms without explaining himself. That unfamiliar yet neutral voice intoned again, quest complete. Awarded, basic skill duplication scroll. You may use it to learn another person's skills. Ranziasu was stunned, because he could feel a leather parchment appear within his mind. A skill duplication scroll that he could use to copy another's skills? Like hunting? Survival? Or some other skill? The robber hugged the large sparrow tightly in his arms and began to express his gratitude. You're a good person. Before he could finish speaking, he saw Ranziasu grab the sparrow back before leaving again. The robber was confused. He stared at Ranziasu's receding figure as he scurried away. The fuck is this guy? What is he after? ch02. Ranziasu returned later than usual because of the robbery and his sudden loss of consciousness. Since he saw the sky darkening, he knew that it would be extremely dangerous to pass through the town with his catch at this time. During the day, people from the stronghold still came out to maintain order. But at night, those people would return back to the stronghold. Of course, the people from the stronghold were not doing this with good intentions. They were only worried that if the town got too chaotic, it would affect the manual labor that the refugees were performing. Oh, looks like Ranziasu got quite the harvest today. When Ranziasu ran back into town carrying the cauldron, someone with a dirty face greeted him. It was as though he had not washed his face ever since the day he was born. Most of the people in town looked like that. On most days, they went to the nearby coal mine to work in exchange for some food. The coal they mined would be delivered into the stronghold, and in turn, the workers would receive just enough black bread or potatoes to survive on. It wasn't only the mining of coal. All the necessary dirty work the stronghold needed to be done would be performed by the refugees. Since the well water in town was rationed, the amount that everyone got per day was fixed, and no one dared to even think of asking for more. Besides, barely any clean water sources existed nearby. Or rather, any clean water source was too dangerous to go to since feral beasts would gather there to drink. Hence everyone in town would always look so dirty that no one could see their faces clearly. Ranziasu was no exception either. However, Ranziasu had never worked in the coal mine before. He had his own way of surviving. Ranziasu did not respond to anyone who greeted him. He just wanted to get back to his shack as quickly as possible. As Ranziasu took an alternate way into town, he could see the towering stronghold walls from a short distance away. It felt very oppressive, for he could not even see the top when he looked up. Not many stone structures could be found in town as most people only stayed in shacks. Ranziasu had started out quite relaxed. But he went on guard the moment he entered town and even drew the bone knife from his waist. The atmosphere on the street grew tense as though some kind of danger lurked within the shacks. But with Ranziasu holding a bone knife in his hand, the people with threatening intentions restrained themselves. The first thing Ranziasu learned while staying here was not to trust anyone other than Yan Liui Uan. Whispers came from the shack next to the road. Ranziasu has caught more game meat. How does that count as game? It's only a sparrow. But it's different from the sparrow that we saw in the ancient textbooks. I reckon that the eagles from before the cataclysm were also around this size? Don't provoke him. A voice ended the whispering from inside the shack. Someone seemed to know about Ranziasu's past. Ranziasu lifted the curtain door to his shack. The warmth in it made him less tense. When Yan Liui Uan, who was sitting in the shack and doing his homework, saw Ranziasu return, he looked pleasantly surprised. You caught a sparrow? Why didn't you light the kerosene lamp? Ranziasu asked while frowning. Yan Liui Uan was usually a wayward child, but in front of Ranziasu, who was like his elder brother, he became surprisingly docile. I wanted to save some fuel for us. What if you become nearsighted? Ranziasu put the sparrow down. Yan Liui Uan's eyes lit up. The school teacher mentioned something called spectacles that existed before the cataclysm but can only be found in the stronghold now. If we have something like that, we won't have to worry about being nearsighted anymore. Ranziasu treated the statement with disdain. I've seen someone wearing the thing that you mentioned before. But to have your vision depend on something that could be dropped at any time out here in the wilderness, that's as good as death. Don't listen to your teacher's nonsense. Not everything he says is right. Oh. Yan Liui Uan nodded and said, then why do you still insist on sending me to school? Ranziasu choked on his words. Why do you keep blabbering? When can I go hunting with you? Yan Liui Uan continued to ask. You're only 14. Why would you want to go hunting? If you do well in school, you won't have to go hunting. Ranziasu said, isn't it much better to learn accounting, physics, or chemistry rather than hunting? Aren't you only 17? Yan Liui Uan was unconvinced. In this era, even savages recognize the importance of knowledge. This was also why a teacher could survive in town. Whatever trouble happened in town, A teacher would always be the safest person since no one would target them. However, tuition was expensive. Otherwise, Renziasu would have gone to attend classes himself as well. Renziasu propped up the cauldron and skillfully dissected the sparrow at the same time. What did the teacher talk about today? I can only let you eat the sparrow's offal. I have to sell off the rest of it at the market tomorrow. Did you get injured? Yan Liuyuan frowned when he saw the wound on Renziasu's hand. It had been pecked by the sparrow, and the wound was still bleeding. The big cauldron was hung on a rod, and the flicking fire in the shack's fire pit illuminated Renziasu's face every now and again. It's just a scratch. It fell silent in the shack. After a while, Renziasu ladled out the cooked organs of the sparrow from the pot and handed them to Yan Liuyuan. Eat up. Yan Liuyuan's eyes suddenly reddened. I don't want it. You should have it instead since you need to heal your wound. I'll just have some soup. Renziasu said, I still have some black bread that I can eat. I'm not eating. Your wound isn't a scratch at all. I saw someone in town die as a result of an infection a few days ago because we don't have access to any medicine for treating cuts and scrapes, Yan Liuyuan stubbornly said as tears nearly rolled down his face. Pa. Renziasu suddenly slapped Yan Liuyuan across the face and said, remember this, you and I can never cry as long as we are living in this world. This world doesn't trust tears. Renziasu continued, look at what kind of people are around us. What will happen to me if you don't eat well and someone rushes in and stabs me to death at night? I send you to school because I hope you won't become someone like me, who only knows how to hunt. You have a unique skill. As long as you study hard, you will not need to work all day in the wilderness like me to earn a living. The reason I send you to school is because I don't want you to become savages like them. Yan Liuyuan suddenly took the sparrow offal from Renziasu and gobbled them down. He managed to hold back his tears in the end as he wanted to learn to be as strong as Renziasu. Ahem, come over and help me dress the wound with a clean cloth after you've eaten, Renziasu said. Okay, Yan Liuyuan responded. You're normally full of mischief when we're outside, so why do you behave like such a doormat whenever we're home? Renziasu sighed. Did anything happen in town today? Oh yes. Yan Liuyuan said as he looked for a clean cloth. A group of people came out of the stronghold saying that they were looking for a guide to lead them to Stronghold 112. They want to head there by going straight through the Jing Mountains. They want to go to Stronghold 112? Renziasu was stunned for a moment before frowning. They're even insisting on getting there via the Jing Mountains? Do you think they'll come looking for you? Everyone in town knows that you're familiar with the lands outside. Yan Liuyuan blinked and said, I heard that there are musicians and singers of abandoned Stronghold 113 who have been invited to perform at Stronghold 112. I've never seen a singer before though. I'm not going. Renziasu shook his head and said, let those people go via the Jing Mountains if they want. I want you to stay away from them. There's something strange about those people. At this moment, Renziasu had conflicted feelings. In a world like this, there were still professional singers and musicians and bands? What on earth was it like inside the stronghold? Renziasu was suddenly looking forward to finding out. C3, A Palace. Chapter 3, A Palace. Renziasu had already fallen asleep. After waiting out in the wilderness for such a long time, all he managed to catch was one sparrow. Although he spent a majority of the time lying on the ground and keeping still, anyone with experience would know that staying alert in such a position was actually very tiring. Before sleeping, he instructed Yan Liuyuan again, stay away from those people if you see them. It can't be that they don't know how dangerous the Jing Mountains are. Most people would choose to avoid passing through there, yet they insist on taking that route. My instincts tell me that this isn't a simple matter. Okay. Yan Liuyuan nodded obediently. Got it. As a matter of fact, Renziasu and Yan Liuyuan were quite the odd team. A few years ago, they did not know each other at all. Later on, Renziasu decided to protect the young Yan Liuyuan as he unintentionally discovered Yan Liuyuan's secret. On top of that, his headache had been troubling him for a very long time, so he needed someone to keep watch for him at night. Back then, Renziasu told Yan Liuyuan in no uncertain terms that they were only a team because of mutual benefit. But over the years, it soon became unclear whether their partnership had any feelings involved or if it was still for mutual benefit. Yan Liuyuan had always been a very clever person when outside. He only behaved like an obedient lamb in front of Renziasu. Sometimes, Yan Liuyuan would say that he was only alive because Renziasu had risked his own life to save him. However, Renziasu had never acknowledged it. At present, Renziasu only wanted to find out what kinds of changes his mind had gone through. He waited a very long time tonight as he wanted to see if this sickness that had been troubling him would recur. In the end, that chaotic confusion did not set in. It seemed like the palace had always stayed hidden when he was in a confused state. But now, that black mist of confusion finally dispersed. Renziasu wanted to see exactly what was inside the palace. When Yan Liuyuan saw Renziasu lie down next to him, he silently picked up the bone knife and sat at the entrance of the shack where the curtain door was. As it was almost fall, it felt a little cold. At this moment, the rain stopped. Footsteps came from outside the shack's curtain door. The shoes that were stepping on the muddy road after the rain made a unique slippery sound. Someone lifted a corner of the curtain door. However, before the visitor could lift the curtain door aside, Yan Liuyuan's bone knife was pressed against the person's neck. It was a pretty face, a beautiful woman stood outside. Yan Liuyuan frowned when he saw the woman. It was not a stranger. She lived nearby. The woman smiled. Liuyuan, you're still awake? Where is Ziasu? I heard that he got back. He's already asleep, big sister Zio. Yan Liuyuan smiled. If you have anything to say, just tell me. Zio's face looked a little unnatural. Did he get hurt when he went out this time? His hand was nipped by a sparrow. But big sister Zio, you don't have to be so concerned about my brother, do you? After all, you're 8 years older than him. After Renziasu had fallen asleep, Yan Liuyuan adopted a maturity beyond his years when dealing with outsiders. No matter whether he knew the person or whatever they might say, he didn't move the bone knife away from her neck. Zio took out a cigarette and lighter from her bag that she carried around. It was a rolled cigarette that was only distributed at the coal mines, power plants, and other properties under the control of the stronghold. A lot of the able-bodied laborers went there to work not only for the money and food, but also for the cigarettes. They would receive a cigarette for each day of work they put in. As such, at night after work, a large group of people could be regularly seen gathering together and smoking. Renziasu once explained to Yan Liuyuan that the cigarettes were likely mixed with something highly addictive. However, it was obvious that Zio did not get her cigarette from working at those places. Zio lit the cigarette and took 2 puffs from it. She seemed to be thinking of something. You cheeky imp, I consider you 2 my little brothers. Oh. Yan Liuyuan suddenly asked, did you catch a cold? Zio was stunned. Yes, does my voice sound a little hoarse? No. Yan Liuyuan shook his head and laughed. I saw that the smoke was not coming out from one of your nostrils after you took a puff. Zio was speechless. For some reason, Zio felt that Yan Liuyuan did not like her very much. Then I'll head back first. Zio said, when your brother wakes up, tell him that I came over. Okay. Yan Liuyuan smiled. I'll pass the message along. After Zio left, Renziasu suddenly spoke from behind Yan Liuyuan. Don't bully big sister Zio in the future. It's not easy for her either. Bro, she's not decent. Yan Liuyuan said, besides, she's only sticking close to you because she knows you always succeed when hunting. Who's decent around here? Renziasu said calmly, no decent person can survive in this world. Everyone's hand is forced by their living conditions. We can only distance ourselves from her. Don't make fun of her. A chaste woman who is too decent would not be able to survive in this town. Ranziasu thought for a while and said, she didn't even mention that she likes me. Besides, are you sure that she's only getting close to me because I'm successful at hunting? And not because I'm handsome? Bro, everyone has not washed their faces for months. Everyone here looks basically the same. Yan Liu Yuan was speechless as he looked at Ranziasu. Bro, didn't you fall asleep? Why are you still awake? I was just thinking, Ranziasu said as a brief explanation. Ranziasu was not asleep because he had been exploring the secrets of the palace in his mind. In the circular palace, the walls were lined with old wooden cabinets, making it look like a huge showroom of sorts. However, he could not see what was on the display cabinets in the showroom as they were covered in black mist. In the middle of the room, there was only one table with a brass typewriter on top of it. It was an obsolete typewriter that would make loud clacking sounds when typed on and hadn't existed for a very long time since the cataclysm. There were only 24 brass keys on this typewriter. Each of them was engraved with a character: fair, positive, honest, real, friendly, kind, rich, strong, etc. It was full of positive energy, in a manner of speaking. But it seemed that the typewriter was supplied with an unlimited amount of leather parchment and would move by itself without anyone typing on the brass keys. Currently on it were two small lines of words that had appeared during the afternoon: quest, gift your catch to someone else. Quest complete. Awarded basic skill duplication scroll. You may use it to learn another person's skills. He could not tell if he was imagining this or if there was some other explanation for it. According to legend, some people could create a memory palace and build a fantasy world based on the level of their spiritual will. But Ranziasu felt that his palace looked a little different from the description of a memory palace. Why would it get him to gift his catch to someone else? Did this typewriter want him to be a good person? To be a good person in a world where ethics came at a premium? No way in hell. At this moment, his consciousness was standing in the center of the vast palace as he looked at the display cabinets around him. It looked like items were floating within the display cabinets, but they were hidden by the darkness. That black mist didn't allow Ranziasu to see what was floating inside. These display cabinets were connected to the dome of the palace, making it look like a huge museum. Ranziasu walked up to one of the cabinets and tried touching the item floating in the black mist. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not penetrate the resistance of the black mist. It was a power that he could not pry into right now. If Ranziasu wanted to know whether the palace was real, he would have to use actions to prove its existence. C4- Luck is a type of skill too. Chapter 4, Luck is a type of skill too. I might possess some kind of skill too, Ranziasu said. Sitting at the entrance of the shack, Yan Liu Yuan was stunned as he lifted the curtain door to gaze at the starry sky after the rain. You mean? I'm still not sure. I have to try it out and see. Ranziasu sat down beside Yan Liu Yuan. According to the legends in town, someone could pull a train out of thin air. I didn't believe it in the past, but after I met you, I thought that it might be a possibility. Now that I might also have a strange skill, this feels very weird to me. Yan Liu Yuan's skill was luck. It was a very baffling skill to comprehend. When Yan Liu Yuan made a wish for Ranziasu to return from a successful hunt, a sparrow would mysteriously drop at his feet even though he did not do anything while walking out in the wilderness. However, this skill had a side effect. Yan Liu Yuan would usually get a fever that would not subside or suffer some other minor illnesses or mishaps after he made a wish. This was why Ranziasu wanted to protect Yan Liu Yuan at the beginning. At first, he did not believe it. But later, he had no choice but to accept this truth. Suddenly, a shooting star flashed across the sky. Yan Liu Yuan subconsciously put his hands together to make a wish. However, he was stopped by Ranziasu. Don't you go making any wishes. Something is going to happen to you if you do. Nowadays, Ranziasu rarely depended on Yan Liuyuan's luck as he was capable of hunting with great success. He did not need Yan Liuyuan to cast his skill anymore, and Yan Liuyuan wouldn't go against his wishes either. The skinny Yan Liuyuan watched the shooting star vanished, lost in thought. Why do shooting stars come and go so quickly? What if people can't make a wish in time? Ranziasu thought for a while and answered, they probably move so quickly because they don't actually want to listen to anyone's wishes. Yan Liuyuan turned his head and gave Ranziasu a blank stare. Yan Liuyuan was Ranziasu's night watchman, but it did not mean that he had to keep watch throughout the night. Ranziasu would take turns with him. After all, Yan Luan still needed to attend school during the day. This was an excruciating situation, as not getting enough sleep was a huge problem. But to survive in such an environment, be it Ranziasu or Yan Liuyuan, they had no choice but to take these actions. In the early morning, Ranziasu led Yan Liuyuan outside. They took their valuables, including Ranziasu's big cauldron, with them. It was expected for someone to rummage through their shack by the time they returned at night. I heard that the people living in the stronghold don't shut their doors at night because no one will steal their things. Yan Liuyuan was carrying a bedroll on his back while he looked at Ranziasu holding the cauldron he carried wherever he went. These were almost all of their belongings. Yan Liuyuan would usually carry the bedroll with him whenever he went to school. It was almost the same situation with the other students as well. Everyone was accustomed to this. Bullshit. Although Ranziasu looked forward to living in the stronghold, he refused to believe there was a place where people would leave their doors open at night. Some people have the mindset that even the farts of those who live in the stronghold smell good and that the air there is sweet. But you still shouldn't be carrying that cauldron on your back everywhere you go, Yan Liuyuan said. What do you know? Ranziasu explained, it wasn't easy for me to get my hands on this cauldron. I can cook meals and catch sparrows with it. If we lose it, how are we going to spend our days? Ranziasu held the cauldron over his shoulder with one hand while clutching the large sparrow upside down in his other. Along the way, many people were looking at Ranziasu with envious eyes. It was important to realize that humans were no longer at the top of the food chain. There were rumors that the sparrows of the past were smaller than the size of a bomb. But these days, even a bird like that could kill people by pecking them. Not everyone could catch a sparrow or had the patience to lie in wait in the wilderness for an entire day to catch one. They all hadn't seen meat and fish dishes in a long time, so it would be a lie if they were not envious of Ranziasu. Ranziasu led Yan Liuyuan to the stronghold's city gate. The towering walls made them feel minuscule and oppressed. Once they reached this place, there were noticeable changes in the architecture, and they could even see brick houses. As they approached the stronghold, the place began to look cleaner, tidier, and wealthier. The people living here were likely related to the people living in the stronghold. Perhaps they were good at flattery or had relatives living inside. But no matter what, these refugees were all known as contaminated and were not allowed inside the stronghold. Ranziasu walked into a shop with a grocery store sign above the entrance. All sorts of items, such as cigarettes, matchsticks, metalware, food, and clothing, were sold in here. But the prices were very expensive. The old man in the shop was over the moon when he saw Ranziasu. That looks like a rather large sparrow. Ranziasu threw the sparrow onto the glass counter. How much can I get for this? Oh my, don't be so rough. That's an expensive piece of glass you're throwing it onto, Old Wang said, pained. He picked up the limp sparrow and put it onto the metallic scale beside him. 1.74 kilograms. Not bad, Ziasu. At this moment, the claw-like fingers of Old Wang's wrinkled hands instinctively started making some calculations on an abacus. The abacus beads were pushed around, ticking and tacking. The market rate today is 200 yuan 1 per 500 grams, so I'll pay you 700 for this catch. Make it 900. Ranziasu said firmly, it's almost winter, and there are fewer sparrows out there these days, so 900 yuan is the lowest I will sell it for. Old Wang was unhappy as he pushed his abacus in front of Renziasu and said, "I'll be sending this sparrow into the stronghold for the aristocracy to eat. Although there's a lack of meat in the stronghold, there's still a fixed price for everything. We have to do it by the book." Right as Old Wang finished speaking, he saw Renziasu take the sparrow back and get ready to leave the shop. He quickly yanked the sleeve of Renziasu's ragged jacket. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to check the price at Old Lee's grocery store," Renziasu said. Old Wang's grasp tightened even further. Someone from the stronghold's management had specifically given notice that they would be coming out to collect exotic animals today. This news wasn't promulgated to him alone. Old Wang smiled, his wrinkles appearing. "How much do you want to sell it for?" Renziasu still wanted to leave. "We'll talk again after I ask around." Old Wang smiled amiably. "Then won't Lai Yuan be late for school?" "All right, 900 yuan it is." "What did you just say?" Renziasu asked calmly. "Then wouldn't Lai Yuan be late?" "The sentence before that." "How much do you want to sell it for?" 1,200. Old Wang was confused. A moment later, Old Wang was feeling the pinch as he counted the money. He wet his fingers with his saliva and counted the cash over and over again, afraid that he would get the amount wrong. The final transaction price was 1,198 yuan. Renziasu had also given some concessions of his own. A sparrow fetching 1,198 yuan was not the result of the inflated prices, nor was it because of the large size of the sparrow. More importantly, it was because the people in Stronghold 113 did not normally get the chance to eat such exotic animals. Things were precious because they were scarce. Old Wang would never make a bad business deal. When he resold this sparrow to a powerful customer, he would still be able to earn a small profit from it and even gain their favor. Old Wang stuffed a stash of loose change into Renziasu's hands unwillingly. Nobody knew what he was thinking when he lowered his voice and whispered, "Ziasu, the next time you catch a sparrow, don't kill it. Some aristocrats want them alive and will offer an even higher price to buy them in that state." Renziasu was taken aback. Why would they want a live sparrow? So that they can kill it themselves? No. Old Wang shook his head and said, "You don't know, right? There are people who keep them as pets." ch05. As pets? They're not buying them to eat? Renziasu was puzzled. What a waste. All of the meat on this is great. You won't understand the world that the rich live in. Old Wang laughed and said, "I heard that rich people used to keep eagles as pets a few hundred years ago. But haven't the eagles gotten too big and dangerous now? So the next best thing is the sparrows. Just look at how menacing this sparrow looks. It's exactly what the rich like." Renziasu thought about it for a while. So while there were still a lot of people who didn't have enough to eat, some people had started keeping sparrows as pets. "But I'll have to sell it for a higher price if they want it alive," Renziasu said. "When this bird is still alive, it can even kill people if you aren't careful. It's too dangerous." All of a sudden, Renziasu thought that if the refugees outside the stronghold were contaminated, wouldn't the sparrows be contaminated as well? Or did the people in the stronghold only need these refugees to work for them? And the walls, did they nationally divide them into a hierarchy? You can only get rich by taking risks. Old Wang smiled and said, "Since you can wait an entire night hunting, you're no ordinary person. If you make an effort to catch a live sparrow, you can probably afford to stop working for the next 6 months. Besides, haven't you thought about making some money so that you can get a wife?" "Get a wife? My ass!" Renziasu said petulantly. Old Wang purposely said in a mysterious tone, "Old Lee, who lives next door, has a daughter who's studying at the same school as your little brother, Lai Yuan. She's a really decent girl. Based on what you said, wouldn't it be better if I just sold this sparrow to Old Lee directly? Would I still need your introduction then?" Renziasu turned his head to Yan Lai Yuan and asked, "Is Old Lee's daughter your classmate?" "Yes." Yan Lai Yuan nodded. "She's quite big." "Shoo, go play over there," Old Wang snapped. Pretend I didn't say anything since you're mistaking my kindness for ill intent. Seeing that he almost got caught between Renziasu and Yan Liuiuan's bantering, Old Wang decisively stopped them by changing the topic. Remember, the next time you catch a live sparrow, you must bring it to me. Sure. Renziasu nodded. Although catching it alive was dangerous, it was not impossible. He looked around the grocery store and asked, "How much are you selling the cotton padded jacket for?" "The jackets are new arrivals, and they cost 500 yuan apiece. You should know that I bought them for 490 yuan each. I'm not looking to profit from selling these cotton padded jackets at all." Old Wang said, "One less death is one life saved, after all." "How kind of you," praised Renziasu nonchalantly. "I'll buy one. Check and see what size Liuiuan should wear." "Bro, buy one for yourself too," Yan Liuiuan quickly said. "Don't interrupt when adults are talking." Renziasu frowned. "I'm not cold." Money was a good thing. The organizations that controlled the strongholds issued money to ensure the distribution of goods and materials. Although it was convenient, without it, nothing could be done. The winter here was freezing, but he had to put some money aside in case of emergencies. As there was still over a month left until winter, Renziasu thought that it would not be too late to buy another cotton padded jacket by then if he could catch another sparrow. More importantly, it was time for Yan Liuiuan to pay for his monthly tuition. Renziasu glanced around the grocery store again, his gaze resting at the counter behind Old Wang. "How much are you selling the antibiotics and anti-inflammatory drugs for?" "You want to buy medicine?" Only then did Old Wang notice the blood-stained bandage wrapped around Renziasu's hand. "You're injured? You really must buy some medicine then. If not, you could get an infection and die." "I'm asking you how much it is," Renziasu said impatiently. 210 yuan each. Old Wang said, "Antibiotics must be taken for 3 days straight. I'll sell you 3 pills for 620 yuan and give you an application of Idoprovidon 1 for free. I only have 10 pills left in stock here." Renziasu thought for a while before saying, "How about rounding it down?" "If by rounding down, you mean removing the zero, shut it," Old Wang snapped. Renziasu smacked his lips and reluctantly looked away. "Forget it, I'm not buying them. Inflammation is uncommon during winter." He turned around and led Yan Liuiuan to school. When they passed by the grain store, Renziasu went in and bought a long loaf of black bread. The black bread was mixed with something that would make their throats uncomfortable when swallowed. Yan Liuiuan said as he chewed on the black bread, "Bro, why don't you also pay for the tuition and come to school since you want to attend classes so much?" "I still have to go out to hunt," Renziasu said. "About what Old Wang said earlier, there are quite a few well-to-do girls in your school, right? You had better not fall in love at such an early age." "I heard that people in the past used to get married when they were around 13 to 14 years old," Yan Liuiuan retorted. Although he had never given such matters any thought before, he found it fun and enjoyable to bicker with Renziasu. Finding joy amid hardship was probably one of the greatest skills that humans had. Renziasu feigned a slap upside Yan Liuiuan's head. "How can we compare what people did in the past? You're still young. The women you get into a relationship with now will end up becoming someone else's wife in the future." Renziasu marveled at the thought. A relationship with someone else's wife sounds quite exciting for some reason. "Bro, what are you talking about? Why can't I understand?" said Yan Liuiuan while blinking. "Get lost. Stop acting innocent with me," Renziasu said peeved. The school was the cleanest and tidiest place in the entire town. It was also the only residence that had its own individual yard. Walking in from the outside, properly spaced crops grown in the yard could be seen: scallions, garlic sprouts, potatoes, cabbages, and many others. Renziasu felt that a place like a school should have bamboo trees growing around it instead. But then again, with food not easily accessible these days, it was quite fortunate to have a place to grow these vegetables. As such, Renziasu's wish was for Yan Liuiuan to become a teacher when he grew up. It was not because he had a lot of respect for teachers, but that he felt that being a teacher was safe. They also had the privilege of having their own yard to grow some vegetables in. Furthermore, no one would ever steal their crops. It was such a wonderful thing. Generally speaking, Ranziasu's wishes had always been very simple. Yan Liuiuan took his tuition money and went to class. Ranziasu squatted on top of the wall and listened to what was being taught inside the classroom. As he could not afford to pay the tuition, he had to eavesdrop like this. The teacher would sometimes tell the students stories about how glorious human civilization was in the past. Frankly, however, the teacher had not witnessed such a time either. Whatever he was telling them now were details passed on by word of mouth, so the truth had probably been distorted already. Although it was not very reliable, Ranziasu was still fascinated by it. At times, Ranziasu would ask Yan Liuiuan questions about information he didn't understand or hear. This greatly troubled Yan Liuiuan because if he could not answer him, it would show that he did not pay attention during the lessons. Hence, whenever Ranziasu was present to attend the lessons, Yan Liuiuan would be exceptionally attentive during class. For some reason, Yan Liuiuan had to admit that his brother looked rather charming when he was seriously learning. It was no wonder Ziyu would throw herself at him. The teacher was holding a book in the classroom as he stared with melancholic eyes at some of the sleeping students. Then he looked at Ranziasu, who was on top of the wall outside the window. He said to Yan Liuiuan, "When you get back today, tell your brother that he can come into the yard and listen to my lessons in the future." "All right." Yan Liuiuan smiled happily.